Hello friends, how are you? Today we will explain a movie called Lovely, Dark and Deep. This is a psycho horror movie. At the beginning of the movie we see a park that looks like a forest. From a house there, a middle-aged man comes out holding a paper. He goes to a signboard that says Ranger Inn and attaches the paper to it. The paper reads that he has bought this land from someone. In the next scene, we see a car heading towards our Boreal National Park, which is the same park we saw earlier. The car is being driven by a girl in a security force uniform. She has a bleeding wound on her finger. While driving, she bends down to grab a tissue from under the seat. When she looks up, she suddenly sees a deer standing in front of her car. At that moment, the car radio starts making noise unexpectedly. She quickly switches it off, but when she looks back at the road, the deer is gone. She feels confused and doesn't understand what just happened. The next morning, we see a man named Ranger Jackson meeting the girl. He asks her name and she introduces herself as Leni. Jackson congratulates her, saying, "Congratulations on your dream job." Friends, you'll later understand why he called it her dream job. Jackson then shakes hands with her and leaves. These people are called park rangers. Their job is to help anyone in the park who needs assistance or is in danger. In the following scene, we see their leader, Zong, giving them training on how to work and survive in the park. However, Leni seems distracted by something. She notices a poster about a missing person and can't take her mind off it. Jean instructs everyone that once they enter the forest, they must remember 3 key rules. Leave nothing behind except footprints. Take nothing with you except memories. Feel nothing except time passing. These rules are emphasized to everyone as they prepare for their tasks. Next, we see a cheerful elderly couple who approach Leni. They recognize her and appreciate her for her job, telling her they plan to go hiking for a memorable experience before they pass away. Soon, Leni is seen arriving at the park by helicopter. We then revisit the same signboard and house shown in the opening scene. Leni is inside the house, cleaning everything and looking at a map to locate herself. She places a family photo beside her and writes on the signboard, "I am here for 3 days due to the summer. Please do not disturb me at my camp." After finishing her preparations, she leaves the house. As Leni walks, she listens to the FM radio, where a discussion is ongoing about people mysteriously disappearing in the national park. Most of these missing people are children, according to the conversation. That night, Leni sleeps in her tent after spending the day patrolling the area, looking for any signs of missing people or anyone in need of help. While walking the next day, she notices her walkie-talkie has stopped working. She removes the battery to check it, but then hears strange sounds coming from the device. Later that night, while using her flashlight to explore, Leni hears unusual noises and suddenly sees a deer standing in front of her. At that moment, the walkie-talkie starts making a scratching noise. Leni responds by saying 14. Here is important to note that every security force member is identified by a number and Leni's ID is 142. However, Leni then remembers that she had removed the battery earlier. Confused, she checks the walkie-talkie again and finds the battery missing. Suddenly, Jackson appears in front of her. Leni tells him about her walkie-talkie problem and Jackson says he has an extra battery. He invites her to join him for dinner. Later, Jackson and Leni are seen sitting by a waterfall, talking. Jackson asks Leni why she chose to work in national service. Leni hesitates but eventually says, "I know you already know everything about me." Jackson replies, "I want to hear it from you because most rumors are false." This hint about rumors will make sense later in the story. Leni is shown to be a reserved person and after their conversation, Jackson gives her the battery. They part ways and continue on their respective paths. At this point, Lennon feels exhausted and collapses on the ground to rest. In a dream, she sees a small child running past a tree. The next day, while taking a shower, the water runs out, forcing Lennon to find another place to bathe. Days pass by with Lennon living a monotonous life, patrolling and surviving in the forest, but something strange is always lurking around her. One night, while Lennon is asleep, she is suddenly awakened by a noise. Fearful, she hears someone outside her door asking for help. Lennon responds, "Sir, I will help you, but first let go of my hand." The man suddenly runs away and Lennon chases after him. She finds the man screaming, calling out for someone, but as soon as she approaches, he disappears. Lennon immediately informs her group by the walkie-talkie about the incident. The following day, Lennon finds that her feet are injured from running the previous night and she is bandaging them. The leader, Zong, appreciates her effort but asks if she is fit to continue. Lennon replies that she is. Zong, pleased, says that a team has been formed to search for the missing people and Jackson will lead it. Jackson then tells Lennon to stay back, but Lennon insists that she can still go. Jackson tells her that she has to remain behind to help keep the group organized. Lennon reluctantly agrees. Later, Lennon goes out searching for a missing girl, calling her name Sarah. She remembers her own lost sister Jenny and becomes increasingly nervous. While searching, Lennon hears another sound and follows it, finding a deer in the woods. But then she sees a young girl standing nearby. When she approaches, she realizes it's Sarah, but she is standing strangely, covered in blood and behaving abnormally. Sarah hugs Lennon, crying, and asks, "Is this real?" Lennon is confused and unsettled. Back at the camp, Zhong scolds her for disobeying orders and going outside. He tells her that she has 5 days to stay in the camp before leaving. Lennon apologizes to Jackson, saying, "We found Sarah," but Jackson replies, "No, you found her." The next day, Lennon goes out again and sees Sarah standing in the same place, but this time she vanishes once again. That evening, Lennon leaves to use the restroom but hears something walking near the trees. She searches, calling out for help. Suddenly, a person crawls behind her tent. Lennon follows, but when she checks, there's no one there. Terrified, she returns to her tent. Soon after, she sees a shadow of a person reaching for her tent, and the walkie-talkie buzzes. She hears someone on the radio, but when she checks, the person disappears. Lennon tells Jackson that she might have found the missing people, but when she goes outside again to search, she ends up near a lake close to her tent. She's been walking for hours and she's confused how she ended up in the same place. She calls Jackson on the walkie-talkie, asking how this is possible, but Jackson's voice on the other end doesn't sound right. It's someone else. Then she hears a bird-like sound and falls, hitting her head. In a daze, Lennon dreams of her sister Jenny calling her. She wakes up, drinks water, and checks her map to figure out where she is. As she's walking, something terrifying happens. Her walkie-talkie plays a message that says, "We have taken you." Then Lennon sees a girl climbing down from a tree, and there's blood coming from the tree. As the girl gets closer, Lennon realizes it's Sarah again, and Sarah asks, "Is this real?" Lennon panics and closes her eyes, but
Our little sister
whispers in her ear, "Give it back. The thing you took from them." After walking for some time, Lennon spots Mr. and Mrs. Fenley, an elderly couple. Overjoyed, she greets them, saying, "Thank God you're here," but when she tries to talk to them, Mrs. Fenley can't see or hear her. Lennon shouts in desperation, but they don't respond. In confusion, Lennon runs toward a ranger she spots in the distance, hoping for help. However, when the ranger turns around, Lennon realizes it's not a ranger at all. It's a horrifying figure who points a gun at her and says, "You'll never leave so easily." The figure shoots Mrs. Fenley, and Lennon realizes that she has been tricked. This is a chilling signal that something much darker is at play. Terrified, Leni runs away and looks up to see trees covered with missing person posters. As she walks, she sees Mr. and Mrs. Fenley sitting and talking as though nothing had happened. As Leni watches Mr. Fenley eat the entrails from Mrs. Fenley's abdomen, she becomes nauseous and vomits. Her anger rises as she starts to realize the true meaning of the ominous signal she'd received. The voice from the walkie-talkie earlier had implied that to escape this twisted reality, someone would have to be killed. Leni understands that the only way out is to kill Mrs. Fenley, but she chooses not to. Then the voice from the walkie-talkie asks, "Have you killed her yet?" Leni responds firmly, "No, I won't." The voice then coldly replies, "If you don't, we'll take you with us." With that, Leni begins walking by the lake and finds a map indicating where she is and where her childhood home used to be. She follows the path and soon she sees her old house in the distance. Leni walks towards the house and notices a pair of small shoes at the gate, her sister Jenny's shoes. These were the same shoes found after Jenny went missing. Leni enters the house and finds 2 pairs of shoes inside. She realizes that this is where her sister Jenny must have been. Her past comes flooding back and she recalls that Jenny wanted to go outside and Leni had refused to go with her. Afterward, Jenny disappeared. In the next scene, Leni hears a voice on the radio saying she hasn't gone missing, she's been taken. The message implies that there's nothing they can do, that Jenny was taken and they have to accept it. Leni is horrified as she listens to the voice on the radio and realizes that it is connected to the horror she's experiencing. An automatic door opens and Leni walks through it, only to find a gruesome sight. Her mother is eating her own skin, tearing it apart with her teeth. Terrified, Leni runs to another room where she finds a dead body. People are praying around the body, but there is one figure standing in the center, her father. And beside him, holding his finger, is none other than Leni herself. As a child, she remembers a moment from her childhood when her father had angrily pulled his hand away from her. This memory brings back everything. Leni's entire family had mysteriously disappeared and she was left behind, blamed by everyone. They called her a cursed woman and she felt guilty for her sister's disappearance. This guilt was the reason she took the job to find Jenny and make up for what had happened. Jackson had hinted at this earlier, suggesting that this job might be a way for Leni to redeem herself. As Leni walks through a corridor, the walls close in around her and she finds herself trapped. The only way out is through a bathroom. When she enters, she sees her father standing in front of her. He looks at her and says, "How would you catch a squirrel, Leni?" Leni responds with a smile by pretending to be a nut. Then her father raises a knife, stabs it into his chest, and looks at her with a haunting smile, as if to say, "This is your fate." Leni exits the room and sees a figure standing in the distance. Suddenly she spots Jenny and runs towards her, calling her name. Leni chases Jenny into a room, but when she enters, the room is flooded with water. Leni, feeling guilty, apologizes to Jenny, but Jenny reassures her, saying, "You had no fault in this." Leni expresses her regret, saying that she should have kept her safe. Jenny replies, "They brought us here." Confused, Leni asks, "Who are they?" At that moment, Jenny vanishes and Leni exits the room. Outside, she sees an old man shouting at her. Just then, a bright light shines and Leni covers her eyes. When she removes her hand, she sees the leader of the group, Jen, standing before her. Leni asks, "Are you real?" Jen confirms, "Yes, I am real." Leni is still confused and Jen explains, "They took us and we gave them what they wanted." Leni asks, "Who took us?" Jen responds, "Who knows? Look above there in the darkness. They live there. The rangers come to us and tell us about the unreal things. They give us some leeway to explain, but sometimes we can't see them. Maybe we saved their universe and that's why they give us chances." Leni, still trying to understand, says, "I gave them the shoes." Jen answers, "The greatest guilt is in giving it to this girl." Jen reveals that he won't let Leni go, but she insists that it's too late because she didn't give them what they wanted. Jen reluctantly says, "I gave it." Then, out of nowhere, Leni is grabbed and dragged underwater. She struggles, cuts through the water, and eventually resurfaces, realizing that she's returned to reality. Looking up, she sees Jenny standing in the distance. Leni calls out to her, but as she dives back into the water, it isn't Jenny who responds, it's Jackson. After rescuing her, Jackson asks, "You knew all along, didn't you?" Leni gazes at him in silence. The next scene shows Jackson, now in charge, standing where Jen once stood, leading the group and giving them a lecture. Jen is nowhere to be found, and a missing persons poster is displayed. The group continues their training in the park, but this time Lennon is much more prepared. Then a voice over the walkie-talkie announces that a person named James is missing. Lennon searches for James and finally finds him. James asks, "Are you real?" Lennon takes the walkie-talkie and responds, ready to inform the others. But after thinking for a moment, she goes silent, staring ahead. Finally, she says, "No, I'm not real." Lennon says this because the parallel universe is a place where people are taken, made invisible, or taken away altogether. Anything taken from this world and brought back to reality requires a sacrifice. The mistake she made was when they took Sarah, and to bring Sarah back, Lennon had to be sacrificed. Jen had sacrificed himself to ensure Lennon could return to the real world. The movie ends with Lennon being sent back to reality, with the hint that her journey of redemption and sacrifice continues. The video concludes with a heartfelt message from Lennon friends. Making a movie explanation like this takes 3 to 4 days of hard work. I ask for nothing in return except for 1 second of your time to hit the subscribe button and another second to like the video. That's all I need to keep going and bring you more interesting movie explanations. Thank you and take care everyone.